time we are pretty much clear with the basics of Apex. We have discussed what are the collections, list, set, map, how to do DML operations with Apex, and in this video we are going to talk about Apex trigger. Apex trigger is something which drives the Apex business logic that you will be writing. So what is Apex class? Apex class is the bucket where you write the piece of code and put it there. That's your Apex class. Now, what is Apex trigger? Apex trigger, the name trigger itself, it tells, right? Trigger is basically which will help you to trigger the business logic, right? Apex is what? It's a language through which we do the automation, correct? Now, automation, what do you mean by automation? Automation means your piece of code that you have already written in the Apex class should be executed automatically. That's what we call automation. What happening exactly in the process builder? Process builder is a tool through which we do few automations. When exactly your process builder fires? Whenever a record gets created or updated. Got it? These are the DML operation: creation, updation, and deletion. So whenever a record gets created or updated or deleted, your Apex trigger can fire and do the automations. You as a developer have written one Apex class which have few methods where you have written all your business logic. Now your business logic will not fire until unless you invoke it. Your Apex class that you have written, it will not fire until unless you invoke it. Apex trigger is something which will help you to invoke that Apex business logic. The definition of Apex trigger is: Apex trigger is a piece of code just like your Apex class which will be fired whenever any DML operation occurs. It means, let's say, opportunity object. Whenever opportunity record gets created or updated or deleted, you as a developer can write your Apex trigger which will call your Apex business logic. Got it? So let's say, for an example, my requirement is whenever opportunity gets created, if the opportunity amount is greater than 100, then there is an Apex class. The Apex class name is OPP class. Suppose this Apex class has few methods. Whenever opportunity gets created, if something is equal to something, this Apex class will be invoked. How do you do this? With the help of Apex trigger. Apex trigger is nothing but is a mechanism through which you will just, your business logic, whatever you have written in your Apex class, will be invoked, will be called. That's it. Your Apex class will not be executed automatically until unless you invoke it through Apex trigger. So every object, no matter it's a standard or custom object, every object has its own trigger. If you go to object manager, go to any object, account, you see account has something called triggers. Now there is no trigger written for this account object. If you go back and see opportunity object also has something called trigger. There is no trigger written so far. We would be writing some trigger. You understand the definition of trigger? Trigger is again a piece of code that you'd be writing in Salesforce which will invoke whenever an opportunity gets created, updated, or deleted. And the Apex trigger, you will not write the business logic in Apex trigger. Though you can do it, you as a developer can write the same business logic. Instead of writing it in Apex class, you can do it in Apex trigger, but that's not going to do it. The best practice is we use Apex trigger just to call it. It is just a switch which will help you to switch on the fan or light, right? Apex trigger is just a switch which will help you to execute your Apex class. Apex trigger will work as a switch and it will be on and off whenever you do a DML operation for the particular object. Salesforce is a database. All you need to do is the DML operations, and all your automations will happen based on the DML operation. Whenever lead gets created, something will happen. Whenever opportunity gets deleted, something should happen. So that something should happen thing you have already written in your Apex class. All you need to do is you need to call that Apex class. How? Through your Apex trigger. You get it? So Apex trigger is nothing but a switch which will be on and off whenever a DML operation fires. And you as a developer, your job is to just use Apex trigger to call your particular method, whatever you have written in your Apex class. We're going to go and write a small Apex trigger for the opportunity object. Okay, so I'm there in the opportunity object manager, opportunity object, and this is the trigger, right? Click on new button. If you click on new button here, just like your Apex class, trigger has a different syntax, by the way. The way you write Apex trigger, Apex class is basically public class name, but the way you write trigger is different. So either you can write the Apex trigger from here, or like how we have learned so far the Apex classes, like you have to go to setting, developer console, and from here you can write the Apex trigger. File, new, Apex trigger. Because it's a trigger, you have to choose for which object you're writing the trigger. Trigger should be there for a particular object. So here I'm going to give a name. See, trigger name should be, let's say for opportunity, the trigger name should be opportunity trigger. Okay. All right. And you have to choose the S object. S object is nothing but Salesforce object. Wherever you find S object, it means either Salesforce custom object or standard object. Choose here the opportunity object. Submit. The moment you submit, Salesforce will write the basic syntax of a trigger, and this is how the trigger looks like. Okay, understand this syntax now. The trigger signature is, you have to write trigger, the keyword called trigger, and the name of the trigger. This is my name of the trigger. Okay, it could be anything again, and as per the best practice, there would be only one trigger per object, not multiple trigger. Again, technically you can write multiple trigger, technically you can write the business logic inside the trigger itself, but there should be, for the best practice, only one trigger per object, and your trigger will just call the business logic. Nothing else will be there inside your trigger. So the syntax is trigger, name of the trigger, on which object, opportunity. This is the event. What is trigger? Is basically the switch. When exactly the switch will be on and off? Whenever a record gets either inserted, updated, or deleted. Got it? So here you have to define when exactly your trigger, whatever you have written in the opportunity, will fire on the insert, update, or delete. Okay, so this is the signature to write an Apex trigger. Trigger name on whatever object, and here events. There could be multiple events because there will be only one trigger per object. Definitely all the same trigger will fire whenever insert happen, whenever update happen, whenever delete happen. Get it? So you can write, you would be writing multiple events in the same trigger. Please understand the event. Event is basically when exactly your trigger will fire. Now, basically there are two types of event. Insert, whenever you say insert, there are two types of insert, before insert and after. What do you mean by before insert and after? Okay, understand this concept. Whenever you insert a data in opportunity, the record will be inserted into opportunity object. Got it? Now, when you insert the record into the opportunity, right, there will be two events. Before the record gets inserted into the opportunity object, after the record has been inserted into the object. These are the two different events. For an example, Let's say my requirement is this. Whenever you create an opportunity, if the opportunity amount is less than 100, I have to showcase some error message. This is basically, you can do it through validation rule. Suppose I have to do it through Apex trigger. Now I have written the business logic in an Apex class, which will throw an error message saying your amount cannot be less than 100. Now I have to call that Apex class logic from here, from this trigger. Now tell me one thing here. Asking you this, right? Tell me one thing here. When exactly your trigger will fire this case? Before the record gets inserted into the database, or after the record gets inserted into the opportunity? When exactly your trigger should fire to showcase this error saying, hey, you cannot enter below 100 amount? What do you think? I hope you have thought the right way. It should be before insert, because if it is after insert, then what is the use of giving error? The record has already been inserted, right? There's no use of giving any error. It has to be before insert. So before the record gets inserted, your trigger will fire. It will check what is the amount. Is it less than 100? Yes, error. So the record will not be inserted. Now, if I give you another example, let's say whenever a record honor gets changed, you know the honor, right? Lead has an honor. Every record has an honor. So whenever a record honor gets changed, the old honor should get notified through an email saying, hey, old honor, your data has been transferred to someone. Suppose you have written one Apex class for it, and you have to call this Apex class from this trigger. I want to ask you this question. What should be your event? Before insert or after insert? Or before update or after update? By the way, there are before and after for all these three events. Okay, before insert, after insert, before update, after update, before delete, after. So what do you think? What should be your event here? My requirement is this: whenever ownership gets changed, right? Whenever a record has been transferred to someone else, right? The previous owner should get an email. Now for that, I have already written my Apex logic. I want to fire it. Now my question to you is this: what should be the exact event here? I think you have chosen the correct one. So my event here should be after update. Why? Why not before update or before insert? See, it's not insertion, right? See, if you write before insert, then your trigger will fire only when the insert will happen. You're updating the ownership, right? Which means your record will be updated. And when you update, again, there are two events, before and after. If you fire the email to the previous owner before the record gets updated, and due to some validation rule, let's say the record has not been saved, then what will happen? The owner will get the email, but the record has not been saved, correct? So this is where you have to use after update. All right. So you as a developer, whenever you get a requirement, you first have to find out what should be the event here. Because your same trigger will call all your business logic, all your before insert, before update, after insert, after delete, all your business logic will be called from the same trigger. So your trigger will have maybe multiple events. Okay, this part is clear. What is trigger and how to write a trigger, what is event, what is before and what is after. Correct. Next video, I'm going to write a small trigger and we'll show you how to write a trigger, and we need to learn about few standard variables. Salesforce provides few standard variables which already have the data loaded. We need to know how to use it. Okay, so see you in the next video.